Hello and welcome back to the show. This is PT Pintcast, the podcast that saves physical therapists from missing out on amazing insight, remarkable ideas, and motivational stories. The best conversations happen at happy hour. Welcome to ours. I'm Jim McKay. I'll be your host tonight, broadcasting live from the Arias Medical Staffing Studios, also known as, well, it's my living room, let's be honest. Find them online at aureusmedical.com, leaders in travel physical therapy. If you're looking to have that PT license, allow you to travel about the country doing what you want to do, which is being a great P or a great PT or great PTA, do it. Find them at aureusmedical.com. Again, that website, commit it to memory, aureusmedical.com. Subscribe to the show, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and now video casting, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter at PT Pintcast on the socials. Great show for you tonight. We're talking Navy physical therapy. We're nice enough to have Drew Contreras, who was the White House physical therapist, on a few weeks ago. That was a cool episode. You might want to check that one out. And then we thought, man, wouldn't it be kind of fun to kind of take a trip around the different branches of the military? Because as much as you think you know about military PT, I bet you don't. So we figure we bring in the experts. So let's do that. Right now, let's bring in our guest for tonight. Stephen Storkrisk, physical therapist at Naval Hospital, Guam. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Stephen, how are we doing tonight, man?
We're doing very well. It's actually at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning, so a little bit different time zone here.
Yeah, you're in Guam. And you know what? Probably triple bonus points if most of our listeners, myself included, would know how to find Guam on a map without Googleizing it. I don't know. Do you think they could?
Good luck. It's a 32 by 8 mile island, so you got to be good at scrolling or guessing.
Yeah. First questions are always the hardest. Stephen, what are we drinking?
Since it's 9 a.m. on a Thursday, I got coffee.
That's smart. But you know what? Coffee's a great drink. We say it's called Pintcast. That's just the container. It doesn't have to be beer. I got a case of this. This is from upstate New York where I'm hanging out right now. Juice Bomb IPA. I'm keeping it local. So we're doing that in our famous I Drink and I Know Things glasses. So cheers to you, 9 a.m. on a Thursday. Appreciate your time, man.
Cheers.
We want to get a disclaimer out of the way. And I'm used to this when I went back in my radio days. Whenever we talk to anybody from our military service, number one, we say, thank you for your service. So thank you so much for your service.
Thanks for the support.
And you want to make sure that you let people know that anything that you say today is completely your views. Yes,
exactly. So full disclaimer, these views I give today are mine and do not represent the government, Department of Defense, or Department of the Navy.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. So Naval Hospital, Guam. So we got to go superhero backstory. Start off. Sure. How did you get to where you are? Like, walk us through your PT journey.
Sure. So I've been bouncing. I've been bouncing for most of my professional educational career. Undergrad exercise science major from Cedarville University in Ohio. Unfortunately, I had the experience of being a PT patient from a couple knee surgeries back then, so got into the field. Took the wild journey to head out to California for PT school at Azusa Pacific. Kind of exposed me to traveling a little bit, got me out of the Midwest, out of Ohio. Practiced in Colorado Springs, Colorado, in a private practice outpatient clinic, so full civilian training and everything. And kind of became a little disillusioned with the private sector, private practice stuff, and started looking at other ways to expand. And Colorado Springs being a military town, I had a lot of good patients and insight coming from some of the Air Force and Army patients. So I started reaching out and kind of looking at ways I could join and serve and kind of expand the role of PT, kind of the scope of practice. I asked my wife and she was like, I'm totally down with the lifestyle, but you got to put me by the water. So Navy it was. So I reached out, did the full almost 2-year-long accession process, was commissioned in 2015 and headed to Naval Medical Center Camp Lejeune, where I got to work at that hospital with the Marines, spent a couple of years there, moved up to Virginia and worked on USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, which is an aircraft carrier based out of Norfolk there for 2 years from 17 to 19. And then last summer, took a long trip all the way out here to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And I've been out here at Naval Hospital Guam for the last year.
That is a cool story, man. And again, thanks for your service. Smart move on your wife saying yes, but, and putting that disclaimer in there. Yes, but I know what I want. If we can be by water, it's a pretty solid move right there. Now, there's different ways that people can, you took the civilian training route.
Yes.
And then joined the Navy. But there's a couple different ways that people can do this, because this came up a few times in my PT program as well, amongst students asking whenever we get someone who is in federal service. You can do it different ways, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first exposure to military PT was in our diagnostic imaging class. I don't remember the name, but there was an Army PT who dialed in to do a lot of the teaching on the radiology stuff because of PT's access to imaging. So that was my first exposure to kind of this unique practice setting. And then looking into it, I really only knew about joining active duty. When I thought about how to serve the Navy, I thought everyone was active duty and you had to do that job. And since I've got in, I've realized there are ways you can support as a government civilian, which is kind of a stable, regular PT job, but you're working at one of the military treatment facilities or attached to one of the operational units, as well as serving as a contractor. And there are several contracting agencies that put PTs in all three branches of service, working in the same setting. So in any, let's say, military treatment facility, you might have PTs who are working for contracts from several different contracting companies, government, civilians, and active duty all working together in one cohesive unit with different roles. Those I didn't even know about until I was active duty. I really didn't even know the access to those. So there's a lot of ways to get involved, short of the most difficult route, which is the one I chose, the most painful, to go the full commissioning. But there are lots of ways to serve.
That's great. So any other different ways to serve that you want to highlight? Because I got a follow-up question in terms of differences, but different ways to serve. You mentioned different ways to get in, but once you're in, any differences beyond that?
Yeah, so the main differences are going to be depending on your location, your branch of service, your population served. I mean, you have, because there can be a large military facility, you can have inpatient settings, you can work with amputees, the post-trauma, the stuff you saw, a lot of those stories coming out in the heat of the war in the Middle East in the mid-2000s, maybe some of those kind of recovery stories, the Wounded Warrior, that whole project. There's a lot of funding from external sources to get involved there. A large part of it is a sports med kind of outpatient orthopedic setting with regular orthopedic injuries, but there are active duty civilian and contract jobs available specifically with special warfare units. So that's Army, that's Air Force, that's Navy, Marine Corps, that's kind of all across the board. You have embedded PT athletic training, a lot of different strength coaches, allied health professionals directly working with those in kind of a more high-speed role. So there's a little bit for everything. Even neuro, there's a lot of TBI jobs. So if you're a neuro specialist, there may be a spot. I mean, the VA, let's not forget the fact that there's a huge overlap in the VA service. For the geriatric population, we do share some medical record documentation. We all work in the federal section, and often we'll end up seeing the same patients at different parts in the lifespan. The VA patients, I've heard some of the best stories ever from them. So, there's depending on what practice setting you are interested in or is kind of your area, there's a way to get involved with military and federal service.
Yeah, wide open, and name a more deserving group of people to work for and work with alongside. Question coming from the Facebook audience right here. Casey Klein wants to know tuition forgiveness as a civilian contractor. Do you know about that? Because I know there's a lot of different things going on. Do you have any?
Yeah, so the tuition, it might depend on the branch of service, but I can speak for the Navy. At this time, there is no direct tuition forgiveness for any Navy PT. But if you work as either a government civilian or as active duty, you do qualify for public service loan forgiveness, which is currently the program where 10 years of service of public service, whatever you have left is completely forgiven. As a contractor, unfortunately, those are contract companies. Your employer is the contractor, not the government. So those are not nonprofit public service companies. I don't know of anyone who's working as a contractor that has a loan forgiveness set up, but don't quote me on that. I'm not a contractor.
Got it. All right. Good insight right there. All right. So we talked about different ways to serve, and you brought up imaging. And so there's a lot of differences between things that physical therapists can do in the military system and some civilian ones. Highlight some of the differences and some of the things that you get to do that maybe some civilians can't.
Yeah. So this is something that over the last 5 years has just kind of crept in, and I didn't even realize how different my practice is from what it was back in the civilian world until I was at CSM this past year talking to some of my old colleagues, and the day-to-day and interaction between professionals. I think the role of PT in the military health system across all branches, from what I've heard, is physical therapists are treated as specialists. So second-tier specialists by everyone. You're going to have physicians, primary care especially, or other specialties from surgeons and everything else deferring to you as the de facto #1 musculoskeletal expert. So if you're not ready for that, because I know that's not what my experience was in the private sector, it can be interesting. It can be jarring because the expected level of confidence and competence is very high. You're treated as if you are the subject matter expert, which I would argue we are. But you're going to have a lot of direct referrals from physicians that are a lot more experienced than you in medicine that are going to defer 100% to your judgment. So learning to be a part of those conversations, be smart enough to their specialties to answer their specific questions, and give confident recommendations. You're not just working as a technician to exercise people. You're really considered an end-range specialist. With the other additional qualifications, some are core privileges, like imaging is a core privilege of military physical therapists. That's the ability to order diagnostic imaging as well as lab testing. You can get also additional qualifications depending on the site, what kind of support they have for joint injection, aspiration, for medication prescription, for dry needling, a lot of the other kind of, call them alternative modalities or maybe fringe practices in PT. If it's legal anywhere, you can get that credential added in the military system.
That's great. Yeah. One of the sponsors of our show, Johnny Owens and Owens Recovery Science, they work in blood flow restriction training. He worked out at the center. Want to thank Johnny and owensrecoveryscience.com for sponsoring the show. But he talked, if it said almost verbatim what you just said, if it's available, if it's legal, you have access to it. And as well as, he gave kudos to the military. He said, listen, a lot of the research is directed by, wartime and time of need. He's like, BFR, something that Johnny champions. He's like, this thing's been around for a while. The military was studying this years ago with people with limb loss and limb loss salvage. So the military, a great place to get involved with research as well. We've had numerous therapists on who've been deeply involved in research. You mentioned a few minutes ago the embedded physical therapists. We talked about that before, and we had therapists talking, well, back in the day, before we had this, now it just seems so obvious and so commonplace. Why wouldn't you to prevent downtime for your units, right?
No, absolutely. I think the embedded role and this is only my third tour, so I'm still early on the journey, but my experience embedded and just seeing not medical experts, but actually commanding officers. So in talking with my commanding officer when I got there, I asked, hey, how are you going to evaluate my performance? Is the PT on your ship? What criteria are you using to determine whether or not I'm doing my job well? And he directly said, I need you to get as many of my people as good as they can as soon as possible, right? So the direct metric was keeping people in the fight, keeping people able to stay on the watches. When you're working on an aircraft carrier, it's essentially you're smack dab in the middle of a nuclear power plant and one of the world's busiest airports. So there's a lot of high risk, high danger areas, a lot of ways to get hurt, but a lot of unique jobs. And it takes 5,000 people to run that thing. So any people you have out really increases workload on others. So having that direct confidence and responsibility from the CO to lean on that PT is, hey, if you tell me this guy's hurt and they got to go or they can't do their job, I'm not going to ask another question. And if you tell me that they're good to go, whether I hear any complaints or whatever, I'm sending them back to the fight, really trusting that. You have to grow into it. Again, is that you're likely most of those embedded jobs are more junior PTs, at least on your first experience. So you have to be ready to grow into that and make confident decisions and adjust from there.
Yeah, I love that. But I also love the fact that the commanding officer, how they were looking at a physical therapist. And this is what we kind of aspire to, in the civilian world as well, or everywhere in the civilian world, which is they looked at you as you mentioned before, as the musculoskeletal expert. If you say my guy can't go or my girl can't go, okay. But if you say they can, we will, and we look to you to keep them running and get them back. I think that's great.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and he was a great commanding officer. I learned a lot on leadership from him, just in deferring to the experts at their level. And again, it's an entirely different world from practicing as a civilian PT. It's something you have to be ready to step into and act on. It's not really a role that you can go into if you're not sure of yourself or you don't have the experience. So getting this private sector experience as well as military PT in the clinics is a very high volume practice. So a lot of exposure as well as great mentorship and training. The built-in mentorship, say what you will about rank structure in the military and how that may affect advancement or timing. There's built-in mentorship. You have people who have been there, who have done that, who are in charge of you. And if you're open to it, you can get great mentorship to make you as ready as possible when you get there and then have those people to lean on when you're not quite sure.
Great insight. All right, we're going to ask a question from a student physical therapist from Sacred Heart University in Connecticut. Bridget Nolan, who helps with the show, is coming in. Bridget, how we doing?
Hey.
All right, so you got a question of Stephen from the student perspective. Go ahead and fire away.
Okay. So for students that are interested in doing military PT, how do you recommend they best prepare and like go to find out more?
So I can tell you that I did not prepare as a student. So I would say if you are a new grad or if you're a student and you never thought about it before, I promise it's not too late. We've had the experience of having some students in our clinics to do clinical internships. That's going to be site specific. But if you're interested at all, reach out to your local military treatment facility or one that you're interested in through the federal section. So I'm the Navy rep for the federal section. If you go on the federal section website, you can see all the different service reps. We can help connect you with different sites that may be offering clinical experiences. So there's kind of a low stakes way to get some real hands-on learning. It's actually getting into the scenario and working with it. There are several military PTs. I'll say the Army probably does the best job, but on Twitter. So you can find military folks on Twitter and interact with them, send direct messages, find out. There's not a lot of direct information on the services websites. So I'd say stick to your APTA kind of guided resources, reach out through that, and then just be kind of open and willing to learn.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good there, Bridget?
Yeah.
All right, glad we cleared that out. That's good. Ask. I mean, a lot of them, I haven't met too many PTs who, when they're asked a direct question to help a student, I always tell students, play that student card as long as you can because you're paying for it, right? With blood, sweat, and tears and some loans. I say play that student card. You were on the Eisenhower, which is the aircraft carrier. That's correct, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. My brother was on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, and I was still a rock radio DJ back then. I'm going to say this is probably 2005, 2006. And did you experience a friends and family cruise? Did you do that on the Eisenhower?
I did not actually. So unfortunately, our friends and family cruise was scheduled during budget sequestration. So it got cut. Our friends and family cruise 2018 was scheduled for end of July and ended up getting cut because of budget constraints.
Well, I'm sorry you missed that because it really was a good experience for me, somebody who did not serve in the military, someone like my brother who was aboard the aircraft carrier. And what that is they literally just let friends and family and loved ones come on the ship. Am I supposed to call it a boat or a ship? Because I always get confused. I called it a ship, and I think my brother told me to call it a boat. I always get confused. But they brought us aboard the Roosevelt, and they took us out for a day. And as you mentioned, nuclear power plant, inside one of the world's busiest airports, they were launching F-18s and helicopters, and they were doing mock dogfights. And I was sitting literally on the deck. I mean, I was going back to Top Gun when I was 9 years old. I was geeking out. But I got a chance to actually do my radio show live from inside the Roosevelt, broadcasting at the radio station in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And you mentioned, sailors from all across the country. They just kept bringing me sailors who were from Northeast Pennsylvania. And we were just shooting the breeze, playing some rock music. And that was a fantastic experience. I highly recommend, going to a military event. If you ever want to get just the smallest taste of what that is like, you're not really going to experience what life is like. Although I'll tell you, my brother brought me to his bunk, and that was an eye-opening experience on an aircraft carrier because there wasn't a whole lot of, I think, on a camera, it looks like, well, it's like a bunk bed. It really is pretty narrow when you're standing there in person. So I want to say thanks again for your service because, aboard a ship like that can't be easy.
I'm 6'6", so fitting is kind of optional. You squeeze and make do, but you get used to it. Now I'll say the most patriotic thing I've ever kind of felt so far in my experience was running cyclic flight ops being underway on the rower in the hangar bay while the F-18s were doing crossing patterns on some training. So you had students coming over, Mach 1+, so you'd see them come through before you heard them, perpendicular while I'm sitting in there pulling a 5K row for time in the hangar bay with a nice breeze doing, 25 knots or so. It was days like that. You're like, yeah, this experience is something that I got to remember because not a lot of people who do my job are going to get to do this. That's cool. Wow. So thanks again for doing that. Let's get into more unique roles that PTs are utilized within the Navy. We'll go specific to the Navy. Talk about some of those unique roles once someone decides and actually commits and they're involved. Yeah, so your first experience in the Navy, or pretty much any branch for that matter, is likely going to be assigned to a military treatment facility, which is what we call our hospitals or clinics. It's going to be an outpatient orthopedic type job. Some folks who maybe be prior service could potentially be assigned to an operational unit, but a majority of our jobs are training, leadership, clinic, kind of running at these military treatment facilities. So the day-to-day, you'll kind of learn a little bit about the culture, but it's really kind of learning the patient load and how the systems all work together. After that, there's a lot of different pipelines you can go into. You mentioned research before. We do have a few specific research jobs directly. The Navy does offer some post-professional training in specialization in manual therapy and in sports medicine, and these are joint programs, as well as the opportunity to get advanced education in the form of a PhD and do some research. There's only a few jobs for that, but that is a pipeline you can go into. There are embedded jobs on aircraft carriers, so that's the only platform, C platform, we currently have an assignment. We've sent PATs out with Marine units on Marine expeditionary units with amphib groups, which was a success. That's not a recurring role at this point, but we've had, through the 2000s, numerous boots on ground deployments, and it's kind of mission specific, but from Afghanistan to Iraq, to Kuwait, to Djibouti, Horn of Africa, you have Leatherneck. There are a bunch of different spots where PTs have been deployed, and you work at the FOBs for NATO. So you're not just really Navy there, you're working with coalition forces, tri-service, everyone who needs issues. And then I think the key thing that the Navy possibly has really pushed, and you've maybe seen these folks on interviews or post-service, is embedded in Navy Special Warfare Units, which is the SEAL teams. So your role there is, again, you're kind of a member of that team. You're really helping keep those guys up and ready, and it's high tempo. You keep them busy. You could deploy with them, and very variable. But you're going to be kind of home ported and stationed where they're at. Where I'm at right now is an overseas assignment. So it's a small clinic. We have an interesting role kind of strategically where our position is. But if you ever want to do PT in another country and you don't want to go through the pain of licensing, the Navy has opportunities in Japan and Guam and Hawaii, in Italy and Spain. There's a whole host of different spots you could be to do PT, kind of in a similar clinic setting you're used to, but living in a slightly different spot.
Yeah. This not Navy, but Army. We just had Ryan Hendrickson, who's the author of Tip of the Spear, on the show not long ago, and he gave a shout out to physical therapists, occupational therapists, strength and conditioning, who were embedded, but as well as in the hospital systems that he was sent to after his injury, a blast injury with an IED. So, yeah, I mean, you mentioned if you want to see the world and get to do what you want to do, a great career there. So, talked about that carrier and special warfare units, that embedded. Now, talk about this specifically, really how to balance your clinical role and your naval officer role, because you're not just signing up to be a physical therapist. You're a physical therapist as an officer in the United States Navy.
No, correct. I think that's, as part of your accession training, a lot of the things that appealed was the clinical side, because I was a PT and, I don't have prior military experience, none of my family. And a lot of the things that attracted me were some of that expanded scope of practice and unique duty stations. But my assumption was kind of, hey, I'm just going to be a PT, wear this uniform and do these cool jobs. And from the day you step on, they remind you, and the training for especially medical is not rigorous. You see any movies or whatever on boot camp or whatever. It's more being indoctrinated into the culture and learning that you're a sailor first. If you're going to put those colors on, the first thing you need to do is learn how to be a competent sailor. As an officer, there's additional responsibilities. So it doesn't matter what your specialty as an officer, there's certain expectations from leadership and personal development and developing those under you. Navy PTs, we're in what's called the Medical Service Corps. So there's 31 different allied health specialties, from healthcare administration to pharmacy, microbiology, PAs, OT, speech therapists, or not speech therapists, audiologists, dietitians, who are all within a core of kind of allied health professionals who have a supporting role to the mission, and then also as a physical therapist. So when you go down the line of that, physical therapist is the fourth most important job that I have. You're balancing, as a sailor, the things that, you have to sacrifice your time and stand duty and go underway and deploy, and just being willing to step up and do that because that's your primary job. In the case of any trauma or casualty, you still work for the medical department. So the second you get into an operational role as a PT, for all they know, you've been trained through med school and trauma school. And so we do go through some training on, platform-specific injuries and emergency care. So you're going to be counted on, in the case of that, to do triage and trauma care and being able to be a supporting set of hands to do emergency management, emergency EMT almost type work. As an officer, almost nothing I'm judged on is my PT skill. The assumption is that your PT skills are good, and our specialty, our community really holds us accountable for board certification and residency and professional development. They really push that, but that's managed by our small community. And I mentioned all the different specialties within our core. We're evaluated against our peers in the course. All the audiologists and healthcare administrators are who we're evaluated against based on our leadership. And leadership is developing the people under you. It's managing departments, organizations, clinics, budgets, finances, doing plans, looking at things on the medical administration side, like billing and coding and personnel manning, looking at things on the bigger mission side, like how do you support the hospital. I'm involved in process improvement and high reliability and other kind of medical culture things within the military health system, as well as how you engage with those operational units. So how are you keeping people in the fight? How are you engaging your local units and keeping them kind of ready to go? Like I mentioned on the carrier, I was also a division officer, so helping with running PT as well as a whole part of medical. We were doing maintenance and performing inspections on pieces of gear on that ship to make sure it's good to go, and standing watch and standing duty. Even when you're in port, you're still on the ship once every 8 days for 24 hours, just standing there with the phone, holding the medical watch down. So PT, depending on what you're doing, you could be seeing 10 to 20 patients in clinic, or you could have 0 patients and be busy with training and drills and all kinds of other stuff that is more leadership and officer specific.
Wow, some insight there. And I know you're doing an overview. That's a quick overview just for this show.
For sure.
That's a lot more responsibility, and I do like how you mentioned that. Sailor first. That's fantastic. Accepting that role. That's great. Anything I didn't ask? Anything that you'd want the audience of physical therapists and physical therapist assistants to know about military physical therapists, specifically in the Navy? Anything I didn't get? Didn't serve you up with?
I guess this is kind of on the officer side as well, but you're going to have PTAs that work for you as well as PT techs, which are enlisted sailors. So as an officer, you're supposed to develop your sailors under you. So your PT techs function essentially as PTAs. They have a bridge program through their training to get their PTA license. A majority of the treatments are going to be performed by PTAs and PT techs. As a PT, again, it's a high volume spot. Most of what you're doing clinically is evaluations and reevaluations. So being good at writing a plan of care is incredibly important, because you may not see the patient again for another month. And again, depending on your volume, even longer. Having techs who work for you, who may be, 18, 19, 20 years old, straight into military indoctrination, into hospital corpsman school, which is our kind of medics in the Navy, and then through a PT tech school. If you get someone from pipelines, you could have a 20-year-old functioning as a PTA, and your outcomes are going to be largely determined by the level of skill and training that person has. So if you're not interested in training, education, developing younger students or whatever, military PT, Navy specifically, can be very, very difficult. And honestly, that's probably my favorite part of the job is having a group of PT techs who work under me here, who make my outcomes what they are. And a lot of it, they're just willing to learn and listen, but it keeps me sharp, because they'll ask questions just like any PT student that knocks my biases back, or that one weird why question. It's like, well, I really haven't thought the why on this for a while, so let me go reevaluate why I'm doing this and streamline my plans of care and make sure I'm writing a good enough plan of care to get the outcome that I want to get.
Yeah, that's good insight right there. If someone doesn't know that, if people are focused on the population that you get to treat, that's good, but you should know what the other things are and that are required in your role. And you mentioned, I'm a leader, an officer, so I'm a sailor first, and that requires me being able to be mentored, but also mentoring in that specific role with the physical therapist assistants and the techs as well. That's good insight. I love that. You ready to do 3 questions?
Absolutely.
Let's do 3 questions. I love this part of the show. All right, 3 questions brought to you by our friends at RES Medical Staffing. Again, we mentioned let your PT or PTA license take you where you want to go. And settings, all 50 states plus DC. And all settings. A lot of times people hear travel physical therapy, they just assume outpatient orthopedics. It is outpatient orthopedics, but also neuro, geriatrics, pediatrics. You want to know? Reach out. AUREUSmedical.com. That website, AUREUSmedical.com. All right, Stephen. First question we ask is a where question. And you grew up in Ohio, but if you could go anywhere, I know you're in Guam and you're rubbing it in. It's probably warm there. It's in the Pacific, whatever. Anywhere in the 50 U.S. states that you would go and spend some time, where would you go?
Probably going to head back to where CSM was, which is in Denver. I lived a couple years in Colorado, lived down in Colorado Springs, and ended up spending more of our weekends in Denver than anywhere else. Proximity to the mountains with the city amenities, you just can't beat it.
Yeah, but the wife wanted to be by the ocean, so she's smart because she put the addendum in there. Second
sure.
is a what question. This is how I build up my Netflix queue or my reading list. What's something you've watched, read, or listened to, book, movie, podcast, that you would recommend the audience get some value from?
Probably the most influential thing I've read in the last year is the book Range by David Epstein.
Great book. Super smart guy, and he's a writer first, so he's just tremendously curious and approaches a lot of things from a perspective of not knowing. And he took a look at really range and what makes people develop into different things in terms of professional athletes. And Range, good one. That's a one that came up a lot when it was first released. Last question is a who question. We start and end with people. So who is someone the audience should know more about?
Who is going to be pretty specific in the Navy. I think we might not know everyone, and I'm going to miss some people, but I've had a few great mentors, the Navy PTs, that have really helped develop me to the point I am right now. So Mark Riebel, who's a Navy physical therapist, I know he's on Twitter. Bradley Wells are two, and then Rachel Condon, who I believe was on the show before as well, are three PTs that I've had the privilege of having some mentorship from and directly impacted me. And at least Mark is available on social media to reach out for, but they're just real big movers within the Navy PT community who've helped me so far. Yeah, and good advice, as you mentioned before, and Bridget asked, which is just reach out and ask people. Can't hurt. Worst they could do is just ghost you, not say anything. Last thing we do on the show is the parting shot. Let's do that right now. Party Shot brought to you by our friends from the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy. Find them online at orthopt.org. They're going to have some things coming out with CSM. We're just kind of waiting to figure out what CSM is going to look like in a virtual world. But they've also got some courses right now just released. As we mentioned, Johnny Owens from Owens Recovery Science, who sponsors this show. They just released a 6-monograph set on blood flow restriction rehabilitation training through the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy. Other new courses, tissue tolerance, the running athlete, upper quarter. Go on there. If you're going to try to up your orthopedic game, who better to do it with than the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy? Again, that website, go there, orthopt.org. Parting shot, Stephen, really your last chance for a mic drop moment. What's something you want to leave the audience with? I just want to leave the audience with the idea that it's not that hard to get involved with federal PT. It's not because it's the government, there's not a lot of marketing, but it's not hard to find people who are involved and reach out. And we are all very, very happy to have people volunteering and showing up and finding out ways to get involved. So if you're interested in all, the best way to learn about it is just to get some exposure. I love that. Yeah, good advice. And, you're going to serve a great population. Ask questions so you know what you're getting into. I know you gave us a lot of information, but I'm guessing that's just the tip of the iceberg. Can't hurt to ask. Again, thank you so much for your service and doing all what you do, and appreciate the insight for coming on the show, man. I appreciate the support and for letting us get together. All right, man. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.